Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on doing more with language teaching. My name is Esther Goldschmidt. I'm a Global Strategic Partnerships Advisor with VVOB Education for Development. And I will lead you through this webinar. Next slide. So first, some practical information. Please note that we are recording this session and we please ask you to mute your mic. If you need these, you can turn on automatic captions in Zoom. We are also joined by a sign interpreter for Indian Sign Language. You can turn on interpretation through the bar under the screen. Questions can be shared through the chat, and we will take some time at the end of the session to respond to Q&A. Please also use the chat to introduce yourselves and to tell us where you are joining from. Next slide. With this webinar, we launched NISSEM's global brief on doing more with language teaching. Teaching language holds the potential of going beyond improving grammar and language skills. Through language teaching, students' communication skills and other interpersonal skills can be built as well. These skills are critical to students' well-being, and they support a student's agency in addressing local and global challenges. In this way, language education fulfills a societal purpose and contributes to achieving the goal of SDG 4.7, which is to introduce a set of sustainability and citizenship themes and values, such as respect for diversity. Language teaching can promote social and emotional learning. SEL is often promoted in educational contexts because of its known positive impact on academic performance. But in this global brief, the authors show that teaching language skills can also promote SEL and student agency. An example of that, which I am very familiar with, is Teaching at the Right Level. TARL is a program that offers students the possibility to gain skills and catch up and get ready for further learning and life, regardless of their current learning level. With this year's global brief on doing more with language teaching, NISSEM wants to encourage a wider discussion around embedding themes and values from SDG 4.7 and social and emotional learning and cell-based pedagogy into textbooks and other education materials. This can be achieved through providing better support to the writers of these education materials. Now let me say a word about the organizers of this webinar. NISSEM was founded in 2018 with the objective of seeking ways to integrate SDG Target 4.7 and social and emotional learning into education materials in low and middle income countries. Since then, NISSEM has published papers by researchers and practitioners in a series of volumes entitled Global Briefs, Educating for the Social, the Emotional, and the Sustainable. The previous volume, entitled SEL in Context, was launched in collaboration with UNESCO in April 2022. Our host of today, VVOB Education for Development, is an international organization with over 40 years of experience in strengthening the quality of education systems around the world. We do this in close partnership with ministries of education and their institutions. VVOB prioritizes the professional development of teachers and school leaders in ensuring quality education for all. By working closely with governments, research institutions, donors, and networks and expertise partners, we strive to maximize the sustainability and potential for upscaling of our initiatives. Next slide. Today, we'll hear from one of the editors and 3 other contributors to this year's volume. And as mentioned, at the end, there will be time for Q&A, and I invite you again to use the chat to submit questions to the panelists. NISSEM's Andy Smart will close this webinar. Next slide. We're now going to move to our 4 presentations, which come from different regions and which will show us 4 different ways of SEL in the context of language teaching. Next slide. First, I'm going to pass the floor to Susan Iannuzzi, who is one of the editors of the volume and has also contributed to it based on the findings from the Gambia. Susan Iannuzzi is an education and publishing consultant with 25 years of experience in first and second language development. After editing ministry textbooks, she began writing and editing materials independently, and her work has been published by renowned publishing companies. She has advised ministries of education on curriculum and textbooks throughout Africa and the Middle East, as well as Central, Southeast, and East Asia. Susan will start off with some introductory remarks on the volume and will then discuss the chapter she has contributed. Go ahead, Susan.
Thanks very much, Esther. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here today. This is a very big event for everyone at NISSEM and my three other co-editors. We've been working to bring this volume to life now for more than a year. And it is the first time that NISSEM has launched a volume that focuses on a single subject. In this case, language teaching, language education. And the volume focuses mainly on mother tongue, which we're calling L1, and on English as an additional language, which we call L2 in the volume. And we thought a lot about whether we wanted to have two separate volumes or a combined volume. And ultimately, we decided to go with a combined volume because the single volume reflects the many concepts and challenges that are so common to language teaching, whether it's L1, L2, or something else, or a combination of that. And this really recognizes that in some contexts, several languages are in use, and L1 may frequently support the teaching of L2. So off we go. The slide there that you see about theory versus implementation. So you're not in the wrong webinar. We are talking about language teaching, but as you can see, there's something there about metalwork. And if you notice something, it's asking all sorts of questions about what are these things used for? And I thought that this would really bring the point home that there's a big difference between knowing what these types of hammers are used for and actually being able to use them. And this is something that is really true for language teaching as well. You can have the knowledge of the verbs, the adjectives, the definitions of vocabulary, but does the student have the skill to use it? So this is something that NISSEM and this volume feels very strongly about, is making the abstract concrete, because there's often this disconnect between theory and implementation. And this disconnect is even more pronounced in contexts that have a long-standing practice of pedagogy that focuses on language teaching as imparting knowledge, again, grammar rules, vocabulary definitions, instead of something that is needed for effective communication. So within these contexts, the textbook is often the way in which the curriculum is operationalized or implemented. So as Andy likes to say, it can either be a barrier or a carrier to change. So while the curriculum may include dimensions of SEL, societal values, SDG 4.7, overlooking the ways in which to effectively present these skills within a textbook often results in treatment of that as content that manifests itself mainly through telling learners what the values are, instead of allowing them to discover those values or reflect on them to integrate them into their own lives. So within the language teaching classroom, thinking about how to include the dimensions of SEL and societal values explicitly within textbooks in ways that necessitate reflection or contemplation is challenging. And this is something that I've been working on within the Gambia, and one of our co-editors, Lisa Horvat, has also been involved with this project. And what we came across was that, there's a very strong societal emphasis and value on many of the tenets of SEL, such as building positive relationships, managing oneself, responsible decision-making, etc. But how do you actually include this in the textbook? It's not enough to just tell them that these things are important, but address why they're important and help learners come to realize that for themselves. So I just want to leave you with these sorts of thoughts as we're going through all of the presentations today, really about, you know, giving learners agency, the ability to communicate in meaningful ways about meaningful things. And all of the papers in the volume really deal with very practical things, even those that are describing research that's been done. There are connections to how this research is so important. That's where it all begins, with researchers, and then hopefully practitioners can implement and make these things come to life for students. So now I'll tell you a little bit about the Gambia in the next slide. So the Gambia is the smallest country in mainland Africa, and you can see it there, sort of wedged between, it's completely surrounded by Senegal. It's 50 kilometers across at its widest point, and the Gambia River is at its heart and really gives the shape of the country. It has two seasons, a dry season and a wet season. We are now just entering this rainy season or wet season. And there's a small population of about 2 million people. Within these 2 million people, there are 7 major national languages and ethnic groups. But despite this, the English is the official language. And this is a holdover from, you know, their time as a colony of the British Empire. Next slide, please. So they have a new curriculum framework in the Gambia, and it really emphasizes the values with 7 national languages and 7 ethnic groups. They really emphasize tolerance, social cohesion, unity, feelings of love towards others, empathy. So these things are all very important to SEL at its heart. Additionally, they have cross-curricular topics that should cut through all subjects, and these are related to environmental issues, sustainability, and disaster risk reduction. Again, the dry season, rainy season dichotomy is very important. As you can see in this photo, this was taken during one of our writing retreats. Every day, the skies would open up like this, and we would get torrential rain. So when we say rainy season, it's not just a little drizzle, it's torrential rains that have the ability to really devastate crops. Erosion is a big problem, and so on. Next slide, please. So right here, I'm showing you the current textbook, which has been in use now for, about 10 years. So this is how adjectives are treated within this textbook. You can see that they are presented as opposites. The presentation and practice of them is as opposites, very kind of objective. Lacking any kind of personalization. There it is. The girl is young, the woman is old, the elephant is big, the mouse is small. So this is what happens almost exclusively when they deal with adjectives. Next slide, please. So this is what we've tried to do in the new textbook. And what you're looking at is not the textbook. This is the manuscript for the textbook, because these books are just being finalized. So what you see in pink and blue, blue is for the designer, pink is for the illustrator, and then the words in black are what will be on the page. So you can see that we have the adjectives there: happy, sad, angry, tired, worried. And these are now all grouped under the category of feelings. So at the top of the page, there's also the listing of empathy. That's not really for the students to read in grade 3. That would be very difficult for them to read, but it does give the teacher some kind of idea of the unifying theme or relationship between these adjectives as feelings. And then you can see at the bottom, we move directly into personalization with these adjectives about how the children are feeling. And sometimes they feel happy. And when do they feel happy? When do they feel sad? And then finally at the bottom, we feel worried. And we may feel worried when there is too much rain, as you saw on that previous slide. So it's removing that sort of distance between the learner and the language, enabling them to see it as a way to communicate about themselves. Next slide, please. And finally, relating this to the SDG 4.7, environmental protection and sustainability. This is from the grade 2 book. This, again, is showing the manuscript on the left with the pink giving what the description of the artwork would be. So the language practice here is understanding a process, how somebody does something. In this case, using Aissatou Cisse, who is a Gambian woman who has been instrumental in recycling plastic bags, which are a huge problem all over the world. So it's taking a Gambian individual and showing how she's contributing to improving Gambian society, but at the same time, the focus is on the language teaching and demonstrating the process. And this is a cover shot of a picture book by an American woman named Miranda Paul, who worked very diligently to bring Aissatou Cisse's life to lots of children through this picture book. So I think that's all of my time. I would now like to thank you and pass on to Abdelkader Ezzaki, I believe, or back to Esther.
Yes, thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you for showing so specifically how these ideas can be put in practice and how they can be integrated in education materials. So indeed, I'm going to hand it over now to Professor Abdelkader Ezzaki. He's a renowned education and trainings expert from Morocco, and he specializes in internationally funded projects. Next slide, please, to the organizers. Yes, here we see the short bio. So over the last 15 years, the professor has served as an educational specialist with cooperation projects in Morocco and overseas. He has taught at Mohammed V University and as a visiting professor in universities across the USA, Europe, and the Gulf countries. Please, Professor, go ahead. I think you still need to unmute. Yes.
Greetings to you, and thank you for putting together this launch event and the document, the book. An exciting event and an interesting volume. The topic of this presentation is socio-emotional learning in the teaching of Arabic in Morocco. We start, of course, with the problem, because stating the problem is half the solution. When we think about the problem of teaching modern standard Arabic, we think of the problem as reflected on 3 levels. First of all, the level that I like to consider, and by that I would like to ground the topic in social talk, in the conversation that people hold about the Moroccan educational system. I have a number of statements that I've collected about the place and the topic of SEL, S-E-L, in the Moroccan educational system. I will point out one of these statements, which says, We learn everything in school, except how to keep a healthy relationship with a spouse. That statement reflects more or less the problem the problem of the absence of cell in our educational system, including the teaching of modern standard Arabic. Another statement says holistic, another problem, another level that reflects the problem of cell in the Moroccan educational system comes from the literature. The literature talks a lot about holistic education, teaching and educating the total child. The literature also brings to the fore the area and the topic of emotional intelligence, which, by the way, brings together the key concepts in socio-emotional learning, as we will see later on. And the third level is the level of the teaching of modern standard Arabic in particular. The problem is that we talk a lot about educating the total child, but in actual fact, we focus essentially on academic learning. The problem also here is that in teaching modern standard Arabic, we are concerned more with the rules and the grammar and the morphology instead of focusing on actual communication. And to use the usual phrase, it is the teaching about the language as opposed to teaching the language or teaching with the language. The problem also is that our children are not exposed to what we call language acquisition opportunities, reading copious materials, listening to extensive texts in Arabic, etc., etc. Next slide, please. In the paper, we took a look at the different models of socio-emotional learning, and of course the CASEL model is most appealing, and it is the one that is adopted in the paper, except that we are highlighting or adding to these components the component of values and attitudes, and these cut across all the different components of SEM. What are the different areas or domains of intervention for embedding or integrating SEL? First of all, of course, the curriculum. Second, instruction, what happens actually in the classroom, including teacher modeling and including teacher behavior, teaching strategies and practices. Related disciplines, by that we mean that there are other disciplines in the school curriculum which can contribute experiences from and about socio-emotional learning. I'm referring in particular to Islamic education and social studies. Extracurricular programs, which unfortunately are almost disappearing from the practice of school life. And these programs are the opportunity for children to see and experience integrated forms of socio-emotional learning. School culture, by that we are referring to the way the school is managed, the way teachers behave in the general school space, etc. And of course, there are other components of the school education, in which socio-emotional learning must be or can be integrated. And I'm referring in particular to teacher education, teacher training. And of course, we're referring also to the wider social context. Next slide, please. When we talk about an innovation, when we talk about socio-emotional learning in teaching modern standard Arabic, we're talking about at least two components, two pieces. The first piece is the set of guidelines that can be shared with teachers, curriculum designers, teacher trainers, etc. Examples of guidelines include looking at teaching modern standard Arabic as a whole, using a holistic approach. Cell-embedded curriculum, we cannot talk in our context about a standalone cell curriculum. We can only integrate cell in the existing or the new curricula. Primacy of fluent communication. This is something that we are neglecting in teaching modern standard Arabic. Fluent communication in the activities of not only in teaching modern standard Arabic as a language, but also fluent communication in using modern standard Arabic as a medium of teaching content subjects. Acquisition practices, by that we are referring to acquisition versus teaching or learning. That is reading copious texts, reading stories, reading articles, etc., listening to extensive materials, etc., as opposed to limiting oneself to classroom or activities or textbook activities. We cannot rely only on the lessons, and we cannot rely only on textbooks, as that's something that we all know. Desirable emotions, values, and attitudes. This is something important, and socio-emotional learning should include this component. Cell across the curriculum. Cell is not only an issue for language teachers, it's something that should cut across all the subjects and all the curricula, all the school curriculum. Relevance, that is making sure that what we teach is actually useful or made useful to students' life. We teach something. How can we make sure that it is useful in actual life? And that's something that we can come back to in the discussion. Narrowing the language gap between the language of the home and the language of the school, especially in early grade levels, and especially in preschool instruction and learning. As you know, in Morocco, there are different varieties of Arabic, and the variety that is spoken at home is not the language of instruction, and that is a big challenge. Here's an illustration. I imagine myself sitting with my colleagues who are the curriculum designers or teacher trainers. And we would say, what is the general map for the curriculum? Obviously, we have the first layer of the themes, the themes that Susan referred to in her presentation. That's the first layer. The second layer are the competencies, the listening competency, speaking competency, etc. The third level is that of the language, what we call in Arabic, the language features. that is grammar, vocabulary, morphology, etc. And then we have the next layer, which is that of the ingredients for enriching the curriculum, including, for example, SEL. So the curriculum designer will have to look at something like what we have here. These are examples of skills and activities, and the curriculum designer or the textbook designer will have to look at these elements that can be integrated in the textbook and possibly in the actual practice. Now, as we have indicated earlier, there is the first component, which is the curriculum and instruction. What the textbook provides and what the teacher provides, etc. The second component, extremely important, this is something that I'm constantly referring to with my colleagues in the educational system, and that is extracurricular programs, which unfortunately we are not paying enough attention to. And that is where we can see integrated SEL skills, SEL skills integrated in sports, in theater, etc., etc. And then, of course, we have the third component, which is the larger school environment and culture. We cannot develop or reinforce SEL skills if these skills are not demonstrated and modeled in the general behavior of teachers, the school principal, etc., etc. Next slide, please.
Can you wrap it up, Professor? The time is almost up.
This is my last slide. Some takeaways: holistic approach to language education, an acquisition-oriented approach, multiple self-growth opportunities, SEL as an ingredient of quality in language teaching. Very important. Doing more with a modern standard Arabic, that means doing more, reinforcing content learning, reinforcing academic skills, socio-emotional growth, and participating in national and global citizenship. One last statement that I will mention, and it is something that I have shared with my colleagues in a recent discussion. There is no running away from modern standard Arabic as a school subject and as a medium of instruction. So we might as well learn it and learn it effectively. That is holistically. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor. And again, a very clear presentation, and it was really clear how there were specific components, and you've given very clear illustrations of them. Thank you. I'll now pass the floor to my colleague, Michael Phiri, who is a research advisor at VVOB. Michael is a child psychologist and behavioral researcher with approximately 8 years. Next slide, please. Yes. With approximately 8 years of experience in developmental and educational research and evaluation. And at VVOB, he is responsible for producing research and evaluation. He is responsible for producing research evidence to enhance learning, innovation, and adaptations to support the implementation of our interventions. I'm really sorry. Michael, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Esther. Thank you so much, everyone. And thanks to NISSEM for this opportunity you granted us as VVOB to showcase our works and how we're contributing to social emotional learning. In Zambia, where we are implementing a methodology known as teaching at the right level, we've been implementing it for over 5 years now, and the goal of this methodology is mainly to it's an accelerated learning methodology that improves literacy and numeracy competencies in learners, And it has a special way in which it delivers. For instance, it groups learners by abilities. How did it? Okay, why is Zambia implementing catch-up? So teaching at the right level has been localized as catch-up in Zambia because it helps learners catch up. Basically, it's those learners who are struggling, who are not up to their learning level, they do improve in the shortest period of time. So Zambia realized that even after 3 years of learning, studies showed that learners, a lot of learners had difficulties with reading simple text as well as doing basic math operations. So they were looking for a methodology that could be useful, that they could use to actually change the situation. And that's how they came across the teaching at the right level methodology, which was piloted in 2016 in a period of 10 months in 80 schools and 2 provinces out of the 10 provinces that we have. The pilot proved that, showed that actually TAO was effective in improving literacy and numeracy skills because a lot of learners were able to catch up. Hence, from then it was scaled up, and now we've gotten to approximately 4,000 schools, and and now it's we're moving from 4,000 schools, and now we're getting to 9 provinces out of 10. So we are basically almost covering the whole nation. Next slide, please. What's our delivery model of catch-up? So catch-up targets grade 3rd grades to 5th grade with approximate ages of 8 to 10 plus. We use local language to actually teach literacy and numeracy. So we have about 7 languages that are used for teaching in Zambia based on region. And we make sure that catch-up is localized in that manner. The type of, and also the schools, in terms of schools, both government and community schools. And then the duration is 3 terms every academic year from January to October. The timing is during school days, outside class hours, at least an hour either before class or after class. Of course, there are a few modalities. Some schools have these sessions somewhere in the middle, but of course, just based on the situation at the school, but they make sure that an hour is allocated. Instructors are school teachers, mentors, district coordinators, zonal coordinators, and school mentors. So these are usually the mentors that are helping and coordinating. So the program is owned by the government. So the Ministry of Education owns the program and provides the coordination, the training, the evaluation, and the supervision. And then as VVOB, we provide the technical support as well as the financial support. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are making a contribution to this volume with regards to SEL. We've had a lot of evidence showing that catch-up indeed improves literacy and numeracy in learners in primary education. So we wanted to go a step further, considering our methodology is learning through play methodology. It possesses the characteristics of play, as you can see in this theory of change. So, of course, this is riding from developmental research that shows that play has an impact on holistic development, including social-emotional learning. So since teaching at the right level methodology is a learning through play methodology, we assume that it increases active participation in class, increases interactions among peers, and also ability to express, the ability to express themselves. And we feel like these experiences that are provided by the methodology, while either teaching language, or teaching numeracy, do lead to social-emotional learning competencies over time. The next slide, please. So in this particular study, which was a quasi-experiment, we had a treatment and control. So Lusaka province, which is the capital of Zambia, it served as a treatment, and then we had Central Province, which served as a control. The baseline was done in February 2022, and the end line was done in November 2022. So at baseline, we targeted 100 schools. The main target was 3,000, but we only managed to capture 2,592 learners. At end line, we experienced some attrition. We got to only manage to track 1,951 learners. We did through our difference in difference analysis. We got to check whether the catch-up program contributed to social-emotional learning competencies. Of course, the attrition, just to explain the attrition a bit, it happened because there were a lot of transfers. The government policy changed in terms of, it changed to free education. So because we cover both community and government schools, so some learners were moving from community schools to government schools because of that opportunity that was provided. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are the findings of the study. So we found that the catch-up program seemed to contribute significantly to empathy and conflict resolution. That is like social problem solving. So story represents social problem solving, and network represents mainly relationships and help-seeking behavior. So we also see that there were also negative results. We see that in terms of relationships, learners still experienced challenges when it came to seeking help or using their networks whenever they experienced any of these situations, either stress, either as they tried to persevere through a task. It seemed like they consulted networks less. And this is a learning point that we are thinking about, because we now asking questions to say, we're asking questions to say, what can we do? What can we do within the catch-up program to help changing the picture of these results? Because we also want these other competencies also to benefit from the catch-up program. So we can go to the next slide. So we realized that catch-up really has the potential to build social-emotional learning competencies in learners. And for teachers, of course, skills, because of the continuous mentorships, CPDs that we do, we think that learners can also acquire skills of how to impart sales skills during those play activities and during the delivering literacy or numeracy lessons.
1 minute.
Yeah, and also we also felt like the results also were affected by exposure time, because SEL competencies can take some time to actually build up. So the period to which we exposed the learners to SEL to catch up could have affected, maybe could have led to us not seeing significant results in other competencies. So what do we do? We're thinking of now scaling the study so that we realize the full potential of catch-up on social emotional learning, as well as consider some adaptations, because we see that, for instance, community schools perform better in those SEL competencies like empathy and conflict resolution as compared to government schools. So from the lessons learned from there, we think we can learn some lessons from community schools, which can be transferred to government schools. Implications for policymakers. We think that cultivation of social emotional learning skills should be explicit and intentional in primary education. And we think that the catch-up or the TAO methodology provides an opportunity in this case. So, and then there is, of course, we think that if SEL competencies could be prioritized right at primary level, they could benefit the learners even in adolescence when it comes to coping with stress and also other areas, as well as just optimizing primary education experience for maximum growth. So this is our contribution. And, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for sharing these findings and lessons learned. So we move on to our final speaker. Please, the next slide. And our final speaker today is Professor Vinh. He is Director General of the Vietnam Institute of Educational Sciences and the Director of the National Center for Sustainable Development of General Education Quality. After doing his BSc at the University of New South Wales in Australia, he obtained a Master of Education in International Policy and a PhD in Mathematics at the Harvard University. In the meantime, please feel free to keep putting your questions in the chat. I can see there are some interactions going on, so that's very nice. Please, Vinh, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Esther, and thanks all of the, as a speaker, it's my grateful to be here today and give a presentation on the contribution on recent NISSEM volume. I'm lucky enough to set a foot on both. Part of the volume, both on the English learning and also on the Vietnamese learning. So I've been mostly talking about how ESL in Vietnam and how it's aligned with the ESL, with the ESL in general. And I will give some of the reflection on the Vietnamese language and literature subjects, and also mention about the challenge and recommendation from our experience. So the English learning has been in Vietnam for a very long time. Back in my time 20 years ago, it is a requirement for the Vietnamese student to start learning English from grade 6. So most of the students will have 7 years of the English at the school. However, the Vietnam ranking in the Global English Proficiency Index is still from very low to moderate in the last 10 years. And we want to see the reason why it happens. First of all, the official curriculum from 2008 is still maintained, how we focus on grammatical rules and vocabulary range. It's very similar to, Susan and Professor Ezzaki's comment, where, the curriculum is heavily focused on grammar and vocabulary. And the second part is the National Teacher Training Program has not been successfully in transforming teacher grammar-driven pedagogy into more communication-driven teaching approach. So the Vietnamese students are quite good on grammar, quite good on the writing, but it's quite limited on communication skill. The learning goals set out by the Vietnamese curriculum seem not have considered a wider purpose of the learning a second language, and it will be aligned with what we mentioned about the social emotional learning. So one of the solutions for that is the new national curriculum framework introduced in 2018 and rolled out in 2020, we aim to transform from the knowledge-based education into the education system that is more comprehensive and try to develop the student quality and capabilities. Next slide, please. So I would like to give you some of the, overview for the new national curriculum framework. At the macro level, it is more about the curriculums, the course objective, and the learning outcome of both the old and the new curriculum framework, 2006 and 2018. It still maintains a strong focus on the theoretical knowledge and the student acquires. And the later framework, having added some of the transversal skill, like the development for the communication skill, the thinking abilities, the self component, including the self-awareness, the social awareness, self-management, relationship skill, and responsible decision making across the CASEL framework has hardly been mentioned or considered clearly as an aspect for the development of the English national curriculum. And it seems like a big challenge for us, even when we introduce the new curriculum. I have to mention that for the new curriculum framework, we also shift the compulsory for the English learning starting from grade 3. So it means across the country, it will be 10 years English programs. And for, some other province, if they can meet the standard, they can start from as early as grade 1. At the micro level, we want to focus on the textbook. We roll out a new set of the textbook from 2020, and at the primary and the lower secondary levels, they are quite limited, the cell-based activities, and upper secondary level, the topic are significantly related to the cell factors, including the relationship skill and the social awareness. And in my paper with Ms. Ngọc, you can see more detailed example from the Vietnamese textbook and also the curriculum framework. You can see where and the effort from Vietnam to move from the knowledge-based to the more competency-based curriculums. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at how to implement the social emotional learning in English language learning in Vietnam, we find out, three biggest challenges. The first one will be the teacher competence. The low level of the English competence and the old-fashioned pedagogical skill found among the English teacher in Vietnam are certainly the first and the foremost issue for the self-implementation. So by their way, teaching English is something like teaching grammar, teaching, the vocabulary. It's not about learning the culture. How can you understand through the language? So it is the most and the biggest challenge, and it's hard to overcome. The second one is the lack of the social emotional learning based pedagogical trainings. Even though the government has issued the policy to enhance the quality of the English teaching at all levels, the training content has not considered the social emotional learning as a recognized component. And the third one, I also listen from the previous talk when we talk about the assessment, the national assessment system. Vietnam is still exam-driven countries, and it's a challenge to make the social emotional learning demand to implement. So, for example, if in the exams only grammar or only vocabulary are tested, the student will lack of other skill, and we are wasting our chance to integrate the social emotional learning components or activity into the curriculums and the textbook. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So I want to step back a little bit and give a reflection on the Vietnamese language and literature subjects. Of course, they are very different when we talk about the English and the Vietnamese teaching in the Vietnam context. But I have to say the Vietnamese language and literature subject in Vietnam is also facing many problems, because the students are complaining a lot about that. They say that we have to follow very closely on the textbook. It focuses too much on the rote learning. It focuses too much on the given form or given type of the text, and it's limited the chance for integrating not only the social emotional learning into the subject but the other topic as well. So the strength for the Vietnamese language literature subjects implementation is we shift from the competency-based curriculums and move from the knowledge-based to the competency-based, and that move is well aligned with the social emotional learning. For the textbook, it is the first time in Vietnam when we allow to have many textbooks instead of only one across the country. So starting from 2020, we have 5 sets of the textbook that can be, quite a diversity range of the topics and the context, including the self, family, school, natural and societies, and guiding the question enables the student to experience real-life situation and to develop the social emotional learning. And many projects and many programs have been in place to enhancing the innovative methods of the teaching language. However, we are also facing, the same challenge for the English subjects, like the curriculums. It's been hardly, because we moved from knowledge base to the competency base. In the textbook, it's been limited the activities and operational system to develop the self-competencies, and it depends a lot on the capacity of the teachers in organizing the related activities. The teacher practice still focus on the rote learning, and in order to maintaining the in-class and new, teaching methods, it's quite difficult for the classroom in Vietnam, because in Vietnam, we're still facing the problem of the oversized classes. In some of the primary class, 40-45 students is a norm, or even in the urban area, more than 50 students in the classroom. So it's quite challenging when the teacher want to be more innovative in the pedagogies. And the last one, assessment system. The exam-driven culture makes the self-demanding is very difficult to implement. The language and the literature exams are very important component in the exam system, but it stays the same for the last 20 years. Still the same kind of the problem, the same kind of the question has been asked in the exam. So it's quite challenging in the larger scale. But for sure, in more advanced, more innovative school, they want to implement the new way of teaching, and we can see the alignment between English teaching and the Vietnamese teaching, where the Vietnamese teacher, they can learn a lot from how they can deliver the English class. And the last slide, please.
2 minutes.
Yeah. So I want to wrap up my presentation by putting some of the recommendation, and that recommendation, I think it should, it should go along with both for the English learning and also for the Vietnamese learning in our context. First one, the most important is to strengthen the teacher training activities at the national, regional, and the local level, including the intensive competency-based training, technology trainings, social-emotional competency training, and the social-emotional learning-based pedagogical trainings. It is, still lacking in many cases. The second one will be enhancing the quality of the teacher training activities to adapt with the needs of the various group of the teachers. It will be very different from the teacher from the urban and the rural city. The third one will be to propose an incentive schemes for highly proficient English teacher to show the government's strong effort to improving teacher quality of life, thus encourage them to stay dedicated to improve English education in Vietnam. It is very challenging solution, but I would like to inform you that, in alignment with the new curriculum, the government has agreed to increase the salary of the teacher in general. And the last point will be to raise the public awareness regarding the wider goal for the learning a language. It means to use the language for the effective communication and for the exploring the world, learning the new culture, rather than merely for the examination performance. Yeah, so it is the 4 recommendations that I think I want to put together, not only for the English learning, but also for the Vietnamese learning in our case. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Vinh. I really like the overview of the strengths and overviews and challenges. It showed the importance of taking into account the country context. So a big thank you to our speakers. Maybe we can move to the next slide. It's already setting up the stage for Andy, who will later on close this session. But first, I want to go to the Q&A. So I can see actually that there has been quite a nice discussion already among the participants, and I also saw some specific questions. Let me maybe start with the first one, which was directed to Professor Ezzaki. The person asking the question asked, I'm curious to know how we can assess the acquisition of these skills. It's interesting how these can be nurtured within the curriculum framework. However, how do we assess them? Professor, do you have a response to that? Please don't forget to unmute.
I think the assessment of self skills is a major challenge. Just as it is easier to test and to assess and measure the acquisition and the learning of grammatical rules, and also the morphology of Arabic, etc., etc. Assessment is difficult, but you will find creative teachers using creative writing, creative speaking, public speaking, participation in class, etc., as ways of measuring progress towards the acquisition of self skills, along with the language skills. Using discrete kind of testing for these self skills is probably problematic, but integrative kind of testing like essay writing, conversation activities, public speaking activities, writing activities, these are possible ways of measuring self skills. Yes.
Thank you. Are there other panel members who want to react on this question? I don't think so. I can't really see the overview. No. So maybe move on to the next question, which also has already raised a little bit of discussion also, or interaction in the chat. And that's if we're giving enough attention to encouraging children to write. So the writing skills as another way of acquisition and fluency. And then I think it was clarified that this is about everyday writing, like encouraging children to keep a journal or taking notes, something interesting, or writing letters. Anyone in the panel that can react to that? Do you have any experience with that, or do you want to react on that idea in general? Professor, yes?
Yes. Writing is definitely a major activity, a major language acquisition activity, or activity for effective language acquisition. Unfortunately, the way the writing tasks are administered by teachers is problematic because the focus of teachers in reviewing and correcting students' writing tends to focus on the mechanics and the grammar and the small ingredients, as opposed to encouraging fluency versus accuracy, as opposed to allowing students to express themselves as freely as possible, even if they make mistakes. One of the issues, I think, that in language teaching, as we all know, is the importance of the affective filter, what Krashen calls the affective filter, encouraging the students to experience not to experience stress when they're producing either writing or speaking. So yes, writing is important, but we should allow students to express themselves as freely as possible, as fluently as possible, with minimal attention to small ingredients of grammar and morphology.
Thank you for that clear response. I also want to encourage you, if you have a question that you want to share, you can also raise your hands and then I will see more easily that you have a question.
Yeah,
I want to hand it to, oh, sorry, yes, Vinh, please.
Yeah, I just want to follow, and echo on Professor Ezzaki, comments about the importance of the writing. It is very, very important, but it's also important about the teacher capacity in order to implement that, because if you don't give the student the freedom and to the way for them to express themselves, it will be like something like the student just writing as a form and to focus on the technical details. And it's happened for Vietnam in the case for the Vietnamese literature subjects, where the student, they learn to write, technically, and they can follow that and can write very long and with the written, but it's very difficult for them to express their own idea. So I think that, in order to do that, it's very important writing the journal, express, the daily life, you giving the critical comments and so on. But in order to do that, you need to, do the teacher training as well, because it's also very difficult to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. I have Mohammed Shafiq. You wanted to ask a question?
This is Shafiq's interpreter here.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to ask if you can spotlight him. So please,
Can someone please spotlight Mr. Shafiq or you? Yes. Okay, great.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So hello, everyone. So my name is Shafiq. I'm from India, and I work with deaf child worldwide as a sign language expert. So I have a query about the social emotional learning, the SEL component, about the teachers. Like you said, the teacher should not stress the student out to follow the grammar, grammatical terms, and all that in language. So the teacher should probably see about the competency of the teachers. So my query is about the special educators who are in the school, the deaf schools, so who are teaching the deaf children, the special educators. So is it possible to, have this SEL component to train them in this kind of SEL component, so they can also develop and, having these kind of components when they teach their children also. So do you have any thoughts on that and how to, train these kind of special teachers who teach their children?
Thank you. Is there anyone on the panel who wants to react, or are there maybe people in the audience who have experience in the specific context? Please raise your hand or your name in the chat.
Well, I don't have direct experience with this, but I think that it's very important to think about those pillars of social emotional learning, especially those that create bridges between people, such as building empathy and positive social relationships. I think that those are ways that teachers can reach children who may be deaf or have other special needs, and try to connect them even to, not just each other, but to other students and other classrooms, if possible. because I would imagine there are activities that all the children could do together in some way to build those positive relationships. I think that in this case, you know, actual techniques would have to come from people who are far more specialized than I am. But I think in theory, this, you know, should definitely be encouraged and could be done.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else who had a reaction on that point still? I don't see anyone. I saw a number of questions relating to TARL and the fact that learners are grouped in learner levels and how that might impact their social emotional learning. Michael, I know that a few responses have already been given in the chat, but maybe can you talk a moment about that, please?
Okay, thank you. So I've taken note of a few questions. There was a question on what did we use to measure SEL? We used the ISELA, the International Social Emotional Learning Assessment. Then there was also another question regarding how our ability groupings don't affect the learners, individual learners, or how they feel about themselves. So the grouping itself is known by the teachers. So the teachers know what the groupings mean, but the learners do not know what the groupings mean. They just take them as, it's like going to a certain club and attend the activities, the fun activities, and come back. But they don't know that those are different levels. So that has also been done deliberately to avoid making children feel less than others. So they just told, no, you're going to learn together with your friends because they're mixed. So you find in one class, in one level, you have both grade 5s, grade 6, grade 5s, grade 4s, and grade 3s. So that already creates a mixed environment, a learning environment. Yeah, so I think those are the key questions that I saw, but I would just like to mention that, yeah, just to ride on other discussions that have already taken place, that social emotional learning in educational curriculums is something new. It's still new to a lot of countries. I don't think it's only ourselves or the countries represented in the volume, but shifting the attention to teaching while also building other skills in a holistic manner is something that requires both, it requires both capacity building on both the teachers, the schools at all levels, including the government. So the ministries, there's need for awareness, like all the levels should actually be aware that there are more skills we need to build in an academic setting in learners, and it's only with that understanding that it will be a bit easier for us to build self skills. So even in the scaling of our program right now, we are actually thinking around enhancing awareness of self competencies in our programming to make sure that teachers, as they deliver catch-up, they are conscious also of the importance of self skills. As they teach language, they use self-conscious vocabulary as they deliver their lessons. So, yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that. Yes. I have another question for Vinh. So it's a question from Margaret. Do you want to ask the question yourself, maybe, or shall I read it?
No, I'm happy. Did you see it, Vinh?
Yeah, I can see it. So
Yeah.
okay, so thank you, Margaret. So you asked me about when in my paper, I suggest that the cell or the SDG target 4.7 may be included as a mean of the implementing the competency-based education, but some of the aspect of the cells may be omitted if there is not an explicit policy to introduce the writer to the cells things. I totally agree, and I think it will be there's some alignment with one question when people asking how can we access the self component in education, and if we over access it, it may water down the importance of the self, and it even have the negative aspect on that. What happened in our situation when we introduce the competency by curriculums, and when we introduce the self component in the subjects, it's become like the needs how to measure it, how to assessment for the student. But we also afraid of that if we overdo it, it will become less important, and the people just talking about that, but don't actually doing the right thing to promote the self component. So I do think like, yes, we need some of the policy, we need how to promote it, but the most important will be, again, come back to the teachers, whether the teachers put it on the top priorities, whether the teacher really want to promote the self for their own student, then it can be done. So the teacher training is a key for this, I think. Maybe other panelists may say the idea as well. Yeah, but it's challenging.
Are there other panelists that want to react? No. I have another question in the chat from Nick. He's asking, is there a danger that once we start testing soft skills, the SEL component gets watered down? Maybe Susan, do you want to take this question?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I think anytime you start testing, evaluating, you're definitely creating another level of stress and, adding to the affective filters that Professor Ezzaki was talking about. And, I think that's a danger. And, I think about some of the work that I've been doing recently with early childhood development and, writing learning outcomes for children for their social emotional development. And this becomes very tricky because what do you do if that child is not displaying the desired social and emotional behavior? Is it a developmental issue? Is it, what's going on there exactly? So yeah, I think that's definitely a danger, but I think that from the point of view of incorporating these soft skills into textbooks, into pedagogy, that ideally it's working on a different level where these pillars of SEL are being internalized by learners, and that becomes, I think, part of who they are, and that's really what's very important, so that reflects itself in their use of language and reflects in their interaction with each other, and hopefully goes, a lot further with them in their lives than just, their school years, to create the types of citizens that, presumably most of us would want to create.
Thank you, Susan. Are there others that want to react?
Yeah, I'm from the audience. I wanted us not to forget how important the family is in the social emotional learning, because day by day, families socialize their children, in the behaviors and values, etc., that they promote, right? That they want to see in their children. So I just wanted to be sure we're keeping that balance in mind. It's not just the school and the teacher.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for
I
making
think,
that.
yeah, that's absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. You know, and the school has a very important role in places like the Gambia, where, you know, you have multi-ethnic, multilingual situations, and you know, hopefully it's supporting what's happening at home, and you know, working in partnership. School and family and community are all working in partnership, ideally.
Thank you both. Thank you. I think this brings us to the end of this session. I want to still give the floor to Andy Smart of NISSEM. He will say some final words to close this launch. And I want to thank you all already for your attention and for being with us during this webinar. Please, Andy.
Thank you, Esther, and thanks to you and your colleagues at VVOB, to the panelists today, and to everybody for a great turnout. It's lovely to see such an audience. On the screen in front of you for the past 10 minutes or so, you've been looking at some of the highlights of our anniversary year. So 5 years since NISSEM was named back in 2018, and the global briefs have been a consistent part of our work, curating authors from across the world around different themes. But with this with this volume 4, we tried to do two things differently. One is to focus on a subject area, because we believe that unless we talk about and show different ways to integrate social emotional learning and target 4.7 in actual subject areas, which is the concern of so many people at policy level and practitioner level around the world, unless we show how to do it within subject areas, then we're missing a trick. We're not giving the support that we could. So focusing on subject area was the first thing we want to do. And secondly, bringing the two subjects, because often they are described as different subjects of mother tongue and national language in one corner, as it were, and additional language, particularly English as an additional language, in the other corner, but showing how these are so much in common, even though they are often treated as different subject specializations. And I think the volume has done this very nicely. Can I have the next slide, please, the final slide? So on the screen in front of you is the entire contents. So we've got 8 papers for each section. First one on mother tongue and national language, and the second section is on English as an additional language. You'll find everything you're looking for in this volume, I hope, in the sense of different regions of the world, different ways of thinking, some very much research-based, reporting on research results, such as we heard today from Michael at the Zambia project, and some reflections on some of the more thorny issues of language and what mother tongue means and what national tongue means. So we welcome you to have a look. The volume is now online. I've just put it in the chat. Please feel free to have a look, download it, share it. You can take the whole book away with you or take individual papers away. And while you're visiting the website, you may find other things of interest, including the previous volumes. So thanks again.
So this concludes our launch. Thank you all for participating, and maybe see you again at another time. Thank you.